Hi everyone, and welcome to this workshop, Beyond Food and Body Weight Polarities, with me, Naomi Nygaard. So let me just go into a little bit of the flow of this afternoon. We're going to start with an opening meditation, then I'll introduce myself, tell you a little bit more about who I am, and then we'll go into a summary of the workshop content, kind of the bare bones of what you can expect from today. There are going to be opportunities for individual reflection time and for some meditations throughout. And you can also type your questions, reflections, things that are coming up for your parts into the chat box. I'll do my best to field some of that as we go through. Please just check that you've got some paper to hand, maybe a journal, because stuff might come up for you, especially during the individual reflection time, that you might just want to jot down either to share with me or for your own individual connection with your parts connected to this topic, food and body image polarities. I am not going to factor in an official break, so please take care of your body. Make sure that you have enough water to hand, and if you need to get up, stretch, walk around, lie down, please just prioritize that and put your body first. Make that number one. Okay, so let's take a moment to go inside and start off with our opening meditation. So I invite you to go inside. You might want to place one hand on your belly, one hand on your heart. Whatever lets you arrive inside your body. Maybe ask the parts that were busy doing other things before you arrived here in this conference to see if they can relax their activities, relax their thinking, so that you can fully be here. Just take a moment to check inside yourself, just to notice what you bring here. Is there a specific curiosity or question that you have? Is there a longing? A way in which you yearn to move beyond your own specific style of food and body image conflict? Is there a particular part that wants you to be here? Maybe a particular part that doesn't want you to be here, but has allowed you to be here. Just notice and send appreciation to any parts that you find yourself becoming aware of. I'm going to check and see how your parts respond to some words that I'm going to be using in this presentation. So eating disorder, body weight, addictive cycle. How do these land for your parts? Do they have particular associations with those words? Maybe set a commitment to process anything that gets extra stirred up during this presentation. And maybe with support if needed. You can always reach out to me as well. I'd love to hear how this presentation lands for you. And before we dive into some content, maybe take a little stretch. Create whatever transition you need. Thank any parts that showed up in this opening meditation. And then come back together. So I'm Naomi Nygaard, and who am I? What gives me the qualifications, license to be here talking to you about food and body image and how to get beyond conflict in this area? Well, I've been working in this area since 2010, so some might say that I'm passionate. I did my IFS level 1 in 2015 with Dick and Paul and some other people that you may know or may not know, but some wonderful teachers. So I feel really blessed that I've been on a wonderful IFS journey, and it's really informed my work since then. I'm not an expert. I have to say that I feel that the main training that I've had, the main qualification I have, is my own struggles and overcoming those struggles in the area of food and body. It's given me a real understanding that when we do get beyond these polarities, our life really does transform. We really can feel connected to our purpose and our vibrancy, and just a general sense of being right with the world and content here, even though it's a tough place. I am available to field any questions you have about this presentation and any kind of issues you have with it as well. I'm really curious to know how this content lands with you. So you can reach me at my website, fabfreedom.com. Fab stands for food and body, freedom.com. And you can also read more about my journey there on the About Me page, if you're curious to know more about my journey of recovery. So let's have a look at how this workshop is going to be structured. So basically it's structured in 3 parts. Part 1 is going to be an exploration into looking at the main areas of conflict in the eating disorders field, and also kind of going inside ourselves a little bit and noticing how those areas of conflict in opinion in the sort of professional arena of eating disorders, they really are a reflection of the conflicts and polarities that we experience inside ourselves individually and collectively. And we're going to look at how to go beyond some of those conflicts and sort of how to soften the way that we view the different methods or strategies of healing eating disorders, and how by changing those concepts and some of the language, kind of understanding the language differently, is really going to be able to help us find a way out of the black and white, us versus them way of being and way of thinking as therapists and as clients that come into this field to look for support. So then part 2, we're going to dive into a topic which is, I guess, an emotive one. It's the patriarchy. It's the backdrop upon which all the conflicts that we have personally in this area spring from and come from. And that's really an attempt, I guess, to de-shame us. Of course we experience conflict. We come from a culture of conflict, and I'm also going to be looking back over our human history and seeing how it reveals that conflict isn't necessarily inevitable for us. I think as humans, I believe strongly that we have a natural tendency within ourselves and as a collective, as a family, towards harmony. And so I'm going to be saying a little bit about the history and what that shows us about the truth of that. And then part 3, unfortunately, I didn't have time to include an in-depth deep dive into this area, but I have included some resources for you to draw on. So that's the part where we look at trauma our ancestral lines experienced due to the patriarchy, and how we can also put in the work really to go back and heal our own individual ancestral lines, and how that has a really positive effect on us as a collective. So just a heads up, part 2 does actually spill over into a different section, and that section is not included in this 2-hour live workshop. To hear that section, part 2, I invite you to follow this link, which is also included in your PDF pack, so you can click on it and download it later at your own leisure. Just also to let you know that this workshop that you're watching now counts towards 2 professional CEs and also 2 IFS CEs, but the separate section, part 2, doesn't count toward any CEs. That's more for your own interest and to watch in your own time. Also, just to let you know that that link will expire 30 days after the date of the live workshop. There's going to be opportunities for you throughout to reflect individually. Unfortunately, there's not going to be as much time as I would have hoped for interaction with you guys. You can chat into the chat box. I'll try and field some of that, as I said. I wish there would be more time for deeper, longer meditations. But if you have the recording, you can always listen back in your own time, pause the recordings during the meditations and at different points where your interest has been particularly sparked. And there'll be more digestion time for some of the content. I might just add as well, I'm not a neurologist or an anthropologist. I'm not a farmer. I'm not a biochemist. I'm not a geneticist or historian. And I am going to be drawing on quite a few of these areas of expertise during my presentation. And that's kind of risky ground because I know because I'm straying outside of my own training, my own area. So please, if you feel that I've got it wrong or missed out an important piece, or if you're interested in any of the references that I've used, please reach out to me and I'll do my best to send you what you need. And also, I'd love to hear your feedback if there's something that I got wrong, because that's helpful for me too. I can make adjustments if I give this presentation again, and also for my own learning. Also, a little bit on the language that I'm going to use. I'm going to use the word patriarchy or patriarchal world order quite often. And I'm aware that this is quite an emotive phrase or term, particularly perhaps for men who feel that it's a way of blaming or shaming them for kind of the crises that we find ourselves in our world today as a family. And I just certainly absolutely do not mean the terms to sort of individualize that gender, you men, and shame you or make you feel bad or make you feel responsible, because I don't believe that's true. I see the patriarchy as a paradigm that affects everyone and at the hands of which everyone suffers. It's one of separation, of dissociation, and I'm going to go more into that. But please, if you feel that it's a difficult word for you to digest and understand, then I do apologize. It's the best word that I've got to hand to describe our society and where we're at. And I guess my criticisms of it, my feelings of sadness about the way things have unfolded in certain aspects for us as humans. Okay, so let's dive into the part 1 briefly, and then we'll go into another meditation to explore for ourselves how it might feel to go beyond these conflicts. So the first conflict I notice in the area of food is this issue of, should we use a plan of eating in our recovery versus should there be no plan? Should we be really just throwing out any kind of pre-agreed idea of what we're going to eat, what we're going to exclude, including what we're going to exclude, any off-limit foods that might be considered addictive? Throw out that concept and just listen to the cues of our own body moment by moment, which is sometimes described as intuitive eating or self-led eating. I've heard it described in kind of more like IFS circles. So that's the first polarity: food plan, plan of eating, versus no plan, intuitive eating, self-led eating. And then the second conflict is more to do with weight. So with our weight, ought we to have a weight gain or weight loss trajectory in recovery, depending on if we're over or underweight? Should we be tracking our weight and looking towards some kind of place in the future where we will feel that we're really getting somewhere in our recovery, versus no weight gain or loss? We should just really throw out any kind of idea of an intention, because that sets up sort of a shaming cycle inside ourselves where we feel we've never arrived, and we're pushing satisfaction and and contentment with ourselves and acceptance of our body into the future, and we never feel good about ourselves. So those are the two main polarities I'm going to look at. I feel that what's happened is that, just like me, often people will go through an experience of change or recovery when it comes to food and body, and then they'll want to tell people about it, or they'll want to help people. And that's beautiful and wonderful, natural human tendency to be of service once we feel that we've made some progress or headway. But the difficulty is that sometimes parts of us can get involved that feel really, really fixed and invested on the way that we did it. And we might have seen equally something really positive happen for a friend or family member, where they've maybe lost a lot of weight or become very contented around food and body, and or gained weight if they needed to. And then we find out how they did it. They might have followed a particular method, or they might have had a food plan or not had a food plan, or they might have found some particular strategy or therapy. And then we sort of start to feel that's the way, and we want to tell people about it. We may train in that method ourselves, and then we start working in the field of eating disorders recovery. And all that's very beautiful, and our passion and adopting a unique style of working that really suits us and that we believe in is extremely beautiful. But the danger, kind of the near enemy of our passion, is when we start to believe other people have got it wrong. We start to maybe proselytize and argue and feel that other ways are harmful or bad. And that's when the field of eating disorders recovery becomes unsafe for vulnerable people that are open to seek support, but get confused about the which way to go. They don't feel this sort of collaborative, open and curious field of awareness. Instead, they feel a sort of divided, divisive atmosphere of animosity. And I really feel, since entering into this professional field myself, that there can be that atmosphere. And I've probably also contributed to it. Some of my parts and their passion have. I really own that. But I'm interested in how we can create a much more free, open and curious space within ourselves, a space of learning and a space of kind of loosening our own attachment to what we feel works, and hearing other people's stories, actually, even if their stories are very different from ours. This certainly doesn't mean letting go of our confidence, our courage, our conviction about what works. And as a professional, I know sometimes, particularly if I'm working with someone who has an eating disorder that's really dangerous or life-threatening, it's important to be really strong in our guidance at times, and kind of step in and be the confidence that perhaps there wasn't before for them in their recovery. But can we use these qualities, these more kind of yang self qualities like confidence, courage, clarity, without that grip of attachment of my way or the highway, and kind of still retain that sense of openness and possibility and teachableness, humility, allowing ourselves perhaps to have got it wrong. An awareness that perhaps we don't know it all and that we're learners too. Makes me think of something that the Zen monk, I think he's called Suzuki Roshi, said, Zen mind, beginner's mind. It's that kind of fresh, open place of forever learning, forever being willing to take on new ways of seeing things. So with that in mind, let's see if we can come together in a kind of a collective meditation, to see if we can use the power of the group to imagine a different way, a shift outside of this kind of divisive place that I believe actually we have gotten to when it comes to the professional field of eating disorders recovery. And into a place where we are using the kind of cumulative effect of self in a group to set ourselves free, a kind of group intention for healing. So first, let's arrive at where we feel we might be at, the reality today. I'm going to get you to picture yourself in sort of a crowd, like a rabble. Might be noisy, people might be stepping forward to kind of shout out their views on fitness, diet, body weight and shape, what works, spiritual methods that work best. Everyone's clamoring for attention. Everyone feels they know. Everyone has confusing differences in their beliefs. See how you feel in this group. Does it feel like you're adding your voice to the group, or that you're just trying to get away from the din, or that your parts are kind of reaching for some guidance somehow in the confusion? Just notice how you feel being here. Now I invite you to let yourself gradually fall into a sort of mysterious, graceful silence. The whole group falls into this place. People just letting go of the need to be right in that moment. People starting to listen for one another in the silence. Somehow in the stillness, we can feel what binds us together, what connects us. This kind of group intention, longing for contentment, peace in this area of food and body weight and body image. Longing to feel good about ourselves, to feel vibrant and to trust our food. To feel well, to feel healthy. To feel safe and relaxed as we eat. Maybe let yourself know that no one's actually arrived in this regard. We're all on a journey when it comes to food and body. Let yourself be nourished by the group. May even have a part or parts that feels really burdened in this area, that's really been suffering. Just invite that part or parts, if you feel them, or if you sense them in another person in the group. Invite them to lean into this powerful group intention for healing. Knowing that self is infinite, and particularly in a group, we can really get a sense of that. What happens when we're in that open field of curiosity. Just notice how it is for your parts being here, tasting the possibility of connection. So we're going to bring this little exploration to a close, and you might want to chat in type into the chat box what it feels like for you, what it felt like to be in that place of judgment and strong opinions versus that place of openness and calm and listening and potential connection. Okay, so now let's look at some of the polarities that exist that I mentioned one at a time and explore how to find peace with them. I'll share my own experience of working with others, though. Please know that like I said, I'm not an expert on everyone. You are the expert of yourself. I'm an expert on me, so I can share perhaps a little bit of my own experience. But if anything I say kind of triggers you as, nope, that's not quite right, I would really love to hear from you. Feel free to chat into the chat box or get in touch with me later on. So one side of the polarity within the therapy world believes that someone struggling with an eating difficulty needs to let go of any plan, and the plan in itself is going to just tie someone into a serious blending with a manager that has to have things be perfect and kind of can't let go of a sense of control and can't trust the body. And that a plan in itself is going to be a sort of a toxic tool for a person and keep them stuck in parts and away from self-led eating. And another camp says that intuitive eating is the only way to go, that it's the only way of being free from parts, and we have to learn to trust ourselves as soon as possible. We have to learn to trust our bodies. And that there should be no off-limits foods within that. There should be no, I don't eat this or I don't eat that. Whereas perhaps that first camp would say, no, the foods that we've been in addictive cycles with, they should be off-limits so that we can go through a process where we're not always yearning for those foods, and those foods themselves are not creating a craving for more. We're not in that sort of addictive cycle. So some foods just need to be off the plates, out of the cupboards, and stay in the supermarkets, kind of where they belong. So can you see that sort of black and white polarity that has been set up? Now let's look at this slide that I've created, because I'm going to show you a way to find a way out of this black and white two camps conflict. And in order to do that, I'm going to sort of redefine some of these terms: plan versus self-led or intuitive. So I believe that we are all existing on a spectrum when it comes to our relationship with food. Some of us are at peace with where we're at, and some of us are not. So it's when we're not at peace that perhaps we need to consider a change. And within this spectrum, there is one side where things are very specific, perhaps things are pre-decided, more in the sort of planning realm. I think of this as the kind of the masculine principle, if you like, those boundaries, that the sort of the clarity in that shows up in that way. And then on the other side, there's this sort of more flowing, more bodily kind of sort of making things up as we go along, perhaps listening to the body, flexing, changing, spontaneity. So some of those qualities. And what I truly believe is that at different phases of our recovery, we're going to need a slightly different mixture of those different elements: the structure, the order, and the lack of structure, lack of order, lack of a plan. And that neither of them are wrong or bad. So one of them doesn't necessarily mean we're blended with a manager, and the other one doesn't necessarily mean that we're kind of at the whims of or vulnerable to firefighters of getting away with and kind of running roughshod over our lives and having us be very preoccupied with food and get distracted from our lives. I'm more interested in the term clarity than plan, because I think the process of therapy and of support in recovery can enable us to discover what unique mixture of those two elements, planning and boundaries, versus sort of freedom or sort of ad hoc, making it up as we go along, intuiting from within ourselves what's right for us on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. What mixture is going to be most supportive and help us most to be free of that conflict? And it's going to be different for everyone. There's no one size fits all. And it's also very, very likely going to change throughout our lives as we grow and blossom in our recovery. Equally, rather than plan or no plan, that sort of warring conflict, I prefer to think of that it's not that there's one side that has the qualities of intuition or the qualities of self-energy available to them versus the other side that doesn't, where because we're adhering to a plan, it means we don't have intuition on our side or self-energy on our side. I just don't see it that way at all. I think we can often find a plan that works for us via the use of our intuition, via the use of self-energy, ours and others. And we can discover what's right for us uniquely through that process of clarity, self-energy, and intuition to find out where we are on that spectrum and what feels most safe and comfortable for our parts, what's going to help them come out of that raging conflict that they might be stuck in. That often requires some tools, that maybe a certain plan, or maybe a kind of a semi-plan, or maybe no plan at all. I might just say as an aside that when I first came into recovery, actually quite a lot of specificity was quite useful for me. And then that did change throughout my recovery. And the specificity that I had and the sort of structure around the timings of my meals and what I ate and what I didn't eat was actually not a manager-driven affair. It was actually an act of surrender, a bit like just sort of surrendering to the act of cleaning my teeth because I wanted to keep my teeth in a good way. You know, some parts of me might not really want to do it, or it might be not ideal or boring or an inconvenience preparing my meals, eating my meals the way I did back then. But there was a follow through, and it actually felt good to take care of myself in that way. And other people might well need less specificity because of where they've come from in their recovery, where they've been in their suffering, and what parts of them they've been most blended with when they've been stuck in that addictive cycle. So like I said, each person is very different, and our parts need something different in this regard, on a spectrum from very structured and detailed, precise, to loose or no food plan, no specific guidance regarding food types or quantity or regularity. And the person instead is able to take their cues from inside themselves, their bodies, that the body, their body as a feedback loop is not too burdened with their experiences and the way they've become with food, that they can actually listen and they can find a way of freedom through that. So how can we know what's best for us? Well, as therapists, we can support someone to discover that through working with the parts that have been most blended with them in their journey of suffering around food, and listening carefully to both managers and firefighters about what it's been like for them to come across certain changes or strategies that someone might have brought in, previous attempts at recovery, how that was for them, and really kind of unburden through telling the story and sharing feelings and experiences what previous recovery attempts were like. Because often those previous recovery attempts that didn't feel good to a person and their parts is sort of the compost through which we can learn what plan might be right for going forward, what might be helpful and useful and feel good to the system. I'm not a scientist. but I do know a little bit about the chemistry relating to addictive cycles. And I've become really interested in sort of deciphering what kind of entrenchment means that we're going to need a bit more support, perhaps a bit more sort of structure around our food to create safety as we're going on that journey from parts being blended with us to being able to feel self-energy flowing through us, that we can conduct our food from that place of self. And to illustrate sort of someone that might need much more structure, I'm going to draw on a little bit of science. So let's look at a slide, and please bear with me. So we all have dopamine receptors throughout our bodies, and these are open to receive pleasurable stimuli and respond in turn with like a rush of pleasure. Might be a big rush, might be a small rush, depending on the strength of that stimuli, the effect on our bodies. These are called D2 receptors, dopamine receptors. And the more we have in our bodies, the more available we are to receive stimuli, even on a subtle level. So kind of a butterfly fluttering past might give us a little rush. And if we've got lots of dopamine receptors, then we are much less vulnerable to being in a compulsive cycle with food. So joy and satisfaction are what the person are looking for, and we all are looking for. If we have enough D2 receptors, then that's no problem. We get that from such a wide variety of different things in our lives that we're not seeking for that in a tasty meal or a tasty snack. And food is basically in its place as a result. So we might get it from stroking a lovely cat, hugging our partner or a friend. We might get it from tasting other foods and enjoying a walk in nature, or a bubble bath, or a refreshing shower. Basically, we can use our intuition to know what an appropriate amount of food is, because we are feeling contented, we're feeling satisfied, and our D2 receptors are kind of kept at that steady level of giving us what we need, that rush of joy and contentment in our lives. Now, when someone has diminished D2 receptors, then they struggle with this. It might be that they need something in their food, something out of their snacks and eating, to give them a bit stronger a rush, because their D2 receptors are diminished. They need that rush to be bigger. And so the food might need to be junk food, sort of high fat, high sugar, very kind of an intense taste, food that's engineered to give us that intense rush. And it might need to be stodgier, fattier, saltier, in some kind of combination of that, in order to light each person up. And it might be a bit different, that combination, for different people. And equally, if it's under eating that the person struggles with in their addictive cycle with food, or over exercising, then it's eating less that gives them that dopamine hit. And it's doing more exercise, or it's doing more activity that gives that person with the diminished D2 receptors that rush of pleasure that they're seeking, that they're not really getting so much of in other things. What causes these diminished D2 receptors? Well, it can be a variety of different things. It can be genetics of intergenerational trauma, so legacy burdens that get passed down from people that struggled with addiction in our families, and with trauma that never got processed, never got healed back then, kind of gets parceled up and given to us truly in this generation. Then there's also attachment issues, negative things that have happened in people's lives, traumatic things that have left it difficult to trust relationships. And there can be a pattern of getting ruptured, a rupturing in relationships that causes harm and hurt, and where it doesn't really feel close to be intimate and close and reveal ourselves, to expose our vulnerability in relationship, to receive love and to feel that we can give love. There's also a genetical or legacy predisposition that dictates whether it's food or other things that we turn to for that rush of pleasure. So it might be that for one person it's alcohol or gambling, and then for someone else it's overeating, and for someone else it's undereating. So there is something genetical there that dictates that kind of what set of buttons that our firefighters learn how to press to get those D2 receptors, those diminished ones or those lessened ones, to get them rushing, to get them serviced. So how would we describe the experience of all this when it comes to the language of IFS and parts? Well, we might have a part that feels strongly attached to making sure that that rush is often and steady, and we might call that the firefighter. Now, that might be chronically overeating or grazing throughout the day. It might be getting us that rush by not eating enough for our body's needs and sort of giving us that high of hunger. This more food or less food takes away an awareness for us of what's going on underneath. So painful feelings of worthlessness, helplessness, hopelessness, shame, shock, fear, loss, grief, overwhelm, lack of belonging. The list goes on, but whatever it is, it's too unbearable for us to really feel that. And our parts need to have a way of making sure that instead we feel pleasure and comfort and kind of on an even keel. And we're not going to be overwhelmed by those negative feelings. Then we might also have a manager part who doesn't want us to be like this with food, who judges this, who criticizes this, who tries to push us into opposite actions and change us and fix us. And this part wants something quite different for us. It chronically worries about our appearance, our health, the way that our relationship with food is diminishing these things and impacting our relationships and our capacity to be able to sort of function in the world and show up and be accepted by society. The problem for that part is that it doesn't feel it's been able to have any kind of long-term or significant agency inside our system. So often instead it resorts to kind of desperate measures of being very harsh with us, and it can even get quite extreme in the diets it might have us be on, or go to people that aren't safe people for us and do some extreme things in an attempt to sort of break the addictive cycle. So some people I speak to have found intuitive eating or attempts to do intuitive eating as really quite agonizing. And it could be that someone with the D2, diminished D2 receptors that I was referring to would be just such a person. So their physiology, their whole sort of brain chemistry over a long period of time has sort of been reset to want certain types of food. I've even, this is a bit of an aside, but I've even heard some research that the gut biome actually learns to expect certain types of food and then calls to the brain and sort of dances as well with the taste buds that have been reset to expect certain really strong kind of tasting sugary etc foods, or salty, fatty, floury etc, that make that person light up. So the whole body is really in that kind of wanting longing cycle for certain specific quite a small range of foods that that person is longing for because of their physiology. A self-led or intuitive eating experiment straight off from being right in this kind of addictive momentum can be really discouraging for some people, can even be agonizing to sort of try it out. The body is the thing that we need to use as a tool to allow us to have these accurate intuitive cues for when we're hungry and what and how much to eat. And the body just feels like it kind of, people judge, or parts of them judge, that the body isn't sort of working, isn't doing that right, because of what I've explained about that physiology having changed over time due to those different factors that I listed. What I've heard people describe as they talk about their inner conflict when they're trying to eat intuitively is exactly what I remember experiencing myself when I was wrapped up in my own conflict. That a part of them is screaming, eat more of this, this is delicious, I love this. And it's particularly triggered by really delicious foods, kind of those high fat, high sugar, yum yum foods that I was describing before. And then a part of them that's like, stop, you shouldn't be eating this, I don't want this, you're going to put on weight, shaming them, and really just panicking while they're eating. And so painful for this conflict to be at play during the process of eating itself, which is really quite a vulnerable time for everyone when the body needs to be relaxed. The conflict prevents the body being relaxed, and the relaxed body and brain is the key to being able to eat intuitively. It is, like I said, the channel through which self energy communicates with us and tells us when enough is enough and when we need more. So, what is a plan of eating, or like I said before, that clarity of intention regarding how we eat? And how is it that it can support us if we are someone that has diminished D2 receptors and is struggling to be able to do intuitive eating? It's clarity that gets arrived at through being open about what's happening with our food, and through trusting someone to be able to support us and kind of finding our way about what's going to suit our parts best, what's going to help them feel that they're not being threatened, no part is going to be overpowered one by the other, and they can feel that they're willing to try something. There's an intention, there's a clarity, and then there's a follow through that happens. Now, a key thing as someone that is supporting, in the role of supporting someone with this process of recovery, is that any kind of deviations that occur from the plan that's been created through working like this with the person in their recovery are seen as and embraced as an absolute great news, basically. It's like, this is good. This is an opportunity for us to get to know what happened for your parts, what the triggers were, and what it's like for your parts that did happen. So any manager parts that are critical, that are shaming, we can bring them into the light. We can talk through what that was like for them. And any parts that took the lead on those decisions to deviate, is it that there's something about the plan that they don't like or don't feel comfortable with? Was there some kind of circumstance or event? Was there an emotional experience that the system was uncomfortable with that led to that so-called deviation? And really, it's just a great opportunity to find out more about what's happening in the system. There's never any blaming, there's never any judgment, there's never any good or bad around sticking to the plan versus not sticking to the plan. And that is key to the success of this clarity of intention plan of eating approach that can work so well when we're sticking with these guidelines for how to use that plan of eating. The key is that self-led eating, intuitive eating, is absolutely only possible if all our parts are on board with it and that they're in harmony with one another regarding food and weight. When that's the case, we can eat intuitively. It is the harmony that our parts experience one to the other, or both one set to the other, that enables us to relax enough, our bodies to relax enough to be able to feel what is right for us when it comes to our food, and for that to be a moment by moment changing and dynamic experience. If we're not in that place and we find it valuable to have the process of using a clarity of intention and a follow through experience and a learning process around using a plan of eating, then that can create a kind of a time of buffer for us. And in the meantime, when we're feeling more relaxed and sort of leaning on the support of the plan of eating, we can go through processes of unburdening, we can contact and experience emotions through the body, we can release those emotions that have been stuck in our body, we can get into habits of being in a different diet where we're going through a sort of a reset in our body. We can develop new and positive ways of being in relationship with one another, where we're learning how to say yes with clarity and no with clarity. We're learning what our boundaries are in relationship. We're learning what our limitations are, not just in relationship with other people, but in relationship with our work, how much we sort of push ourselves and do a lot, versus how much we let ourselves rest and care for our body. It's a bit of a kind of chicken or egg situation, because when there is a conflict raging inside us when it comes to food, we can't really learn these new skills. We can't really learn how to unburden and go through that emotional release that's required. We can't really learn how to set healthy limits and boundaries in relationships. We can't really learn a good balance of work versus self-care. Those things do really evade us when we're in that preoccupation with food and our bodies. And on the flip side of that, we can't really be in good relations with food and our bodies when we're wrapped up in a lifestyle that includes unprocessed emotions, relationships where we're not able to set boundaries, overworking, not taking care of ourselves, etc. So, like I said, chicken and egg. The flow of recovery, in my experience, always goes the same way. So we start with food being the responsibility of our parts. They've taken over at a certain stage in our lives, usually when we were quite young, and now they're battling. They're trying to create this sort of skewed balance between one another through that conflict: eat more, don't eat more, etc., a conflict that is raging. And our parts are the ones that are front and center when it comes to our food. And it's a horrible place to be. It's a place of suffering and disconnection from our lives. And then we get into recovery. So somehow we find our way into a solution. We're curious to get support, we're curious to make changes, and our parts slowly start to get on board with that. And they share more about their fears, and they can start to learn to trust a different way. The important thing is that that process of what tools of support do we need is guided by self. And I believe it always is. There's always a learning, even if a particular method doesn't work out for us. But through that learning, we get clear about what is right for me in my recovery right now. Is it a loose plan of eating, a specific one? Is it meal support, which is more of a tool for someone that's under eating, which I can say more about later? Is it no plan and just talking about my decisions and processing it as I go along? And always people are involved in this phase. So using the self energy of other people, whether it's a support network of people that we gather around us that we trust, maybe 2 or 3 people. Is it a therapist that we meet with once a week, an IFS therapist? These tools can be invaluable to talk about our food, to talk about what we're going through, to receive input, to share how it is. And always we trust these people. We're not criticized by them or blamed by them, but they're joining with us on that path of curiosity and learning as we go from food in the hands of food in the hands of parts to food in the hands of self. It's that transition that we're looking for, and all the tools of support that we require when it comes to the practical nuts and bolts of our food and also our emotional and spiritual healing. And then we arrive at what I've called C, food choices and decisions are made by self. So eventually, and it can take weeks, it can take months, it usually takes years. In my experience, it took years, and it can take decades, and all of that is absolutely fine. There is really no rush about this. In fact, rushing, as with most of these things, doesn't work. It just stymies the process, in fact. So being patient with ourselves and just continuing on and prioritizing our food and body relationship freedom path, prioritizing our emotional and spiritual healing, is what actually, in my experience, often sets the pace more than how unwell or unhappy someone was with food. It's how much they put it first to find that healing for themselves and find what works, and then stick with it, get consistent with it. And then we will, and I have arrived at a place where we listen to our body, and it's not it doesn't even have to be a conscious listening. We just know what we need. We can feel moved to eat more, less, choose certain foods, and flex with it a bit as well, like change with it. And we can arrive at that place knowing that we can always go back, find the support we need, kind of go back to be, maybe talk more about food, sort of fine tune it, get input, come to C again. There isn't, and even go to A, parts take over. There is really kind of a no shame, no blame approach to, it might be 2 steps forward, one step back. It might even be that it's sometimes 1 step forward, 1 step back. But there's always this sort of what we call in 12-step recovery, a progress, not perfection attitude about this flow of recovery that I'm describing. So I describe meal support as something that we can adopt in that B phase of recovery. And that is something that I've heard of in the 12-step program, ABA, Anorexics Bulimics Anonymous. It's basically a general way of, but a consistent and disciplined way of receiving support from someone else that knows how much we should be eating. So it can be that if we're very much under eating, we allow friends or family to cook for us. We might get Meals on Wheels. It might be that we get pre-packed meals because then someone else in a factory somewhere pre-decided how much food we should have. With all of these tools that get used in that B phase that I've described in the flow of recovery, the experience for our parts is that they go from a place of being fully in control and having that burden of responsibility on them, and that power as well, the dominance and power that perhaps our parts actually do quite enjoy, to trusting self, that self, and via the self of other people, trusting self to be able to handle food, and that actually they pretty much enjoy taking a load off in that way and doing things that are much more flowing for them, less stressful, etc. They can use their values, their gifts, and take pleasure in the person's life, and be guided by self, so that they don't have to be stressed all the time and be in conflict. All the while, someone with those D2 receptors that are diminished that I was mentioning are having a physical healing experience, just literally, not through anything clever, but through the consistency of having a different way of eating and feeling relaxed about food. It changes, it transforms the body on a very cellular level. And really, we never do and never can go back quite to the same amount and level, degree of entrenchment in our addiction that we were in before, because the body's changed, the body's reset, the brain chemistry's changed. I know this is just a little aside, but every 7 years, we don't actually have one cell in our body that is the same as the previous 7 years. So the oldest cells in our body, which happen to be our liver cells, all of them also get changed within a 7-year period. So when we're going through spiritual, emotional healing, there really is no going back to how we were before. And it could be that we, like I said, that sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, we do decide, actually, I'm going to adopt a clarity of eating approach again. I'm going to call people in to support me. I'm going to pick up a plan of eating for this specific phase of my life. It could be for women that they hit a different phase. They might find that they're pregnant, or they might be in menopause. Could be that health challenges like arthritis, diabetes, high blood pressure warrant a certain type of diet. It could be that they're going through a lot of emotional processing, traumatic time, big changes, and that more support in B is needed. Then as we shift into C, that C part of the flow of recovery, our parts might need quite a lot of reassurance in that transition, because they remember how hellish it was for us to be in A, where they were in charge, where they were stressed, where they felt self wasn't there, wasn't able to help with the food and body weight issue, and the responsibility was all on their shoulders. So they might be worried in that transition. The firefighter might feel, oh, this is going to be the opportunity that the manager's been waiting for to take back its iron grip control, bully me, and I won't get that opportunity to take pleasure from food, be spontaneous, enjoy food, and kind of be lighthearted with food. And on the flip side, the manager might feel really nervous that this is going to be an opportunity for kind of sneaky firefighters to get away with what they want to get away with. So they're just going to steer us right back into the kind of the mire and the mud of compulsive overeating all the time, doing exactly what they want. So there can be a lot of fear in that transition of moving over and letting go of the tools that were adopted for support in recovery, and trusting that the body has gone through that reset phase and is now an effective channel for intuiting the appetite of the person moment by moment, day by day. So this is where a lot of reassurance can be offered. But over that phase, that recovery phase B, there's been some amazing shifts and changes. So firefighters and managers both might need to be reminded of some of those big releases of emotion that occurred, some of those learnings and new intimate relations and ways of connecting with life and feeling intimate with life have started to be experienced by the person. And through that sort of resetting of their memories and the establishment of their confidence really in the process of recovery, slowly they can start to trust that maybe not all of those tools are needed anymore, and the body can be used, and self energy flowing through the body can be used more and more increasingly when it comes to dealing with food. I'll just say that I feel from talking to other therapists and hearing more about the prejudice against food planning, that a lot of times it's because people have come across other people that have been quite punitive in their delivery of this tool. So they might have had their own parts, manager parts, that have wanted to kind of boss people around when it comes to food, or kind of vicariously control people's food because they're not able to control their own, or maybe they blended with manager parts themselves that are really terrified of somehow being tricked by firefighter parts in the person that they're trying to support. And so and whether that's a client or a sponsee in 12-step recovery. And so they're really in a place of wanting to push the person around and demand perfection in the food plan. And that is really hurtful. And often I find when I'm working with someone that's had that experience in their recovery, that dynamic that they find with that person that was in a so-called support role and might have been in a kind of position of authority in their recovery, that relationship, that dynamic echoes a dynamic they might have had in their own childhood. So whether it was a very harsh teacher, a harsh parent, there was something there that they needed to kind of re-experience, painful as it was, in their so-called recovery so far. And the important thing as a therapist, if that has occurred for someone, is to really listen to how that was for parts. And it can even be a gentle segue into finding some really hurting parts there, the young ones that didn't get the love that they needed back then, or the freedom that they needed. And actually, that's sort of been borne out through this relationship with food that they have. So it might well have inflamed their firefighters, made firefighters hate recovery, and kind of, recovery doesn't work, forget this is hurtful, this isn't helping. And some kind of re-traumatization has happened for them. And I totally understand how that could make therapists think food plans don't work. But actually, it's not about the food plan, it's not about the tool itself. That is kind of, how do I say this? I guess the expression, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, is coming to me. It's not the tool that's to blame, it's the kind of way in which it's been held. If it's been held with an iron grip, then that's not helpful. And equally, if it's not been held at all and there's no sort of accountability or feedback or kind of ongoing support for the person, that's not helpful either. So it's somewhere in between gripping and letting go. It's this holding of the tool in a relaxed, curious, calm way that makes the tool effective. So I'm going to invite you to consider what might be best for you when it comes to your relationship with food. Is it that kind of quite a specific food plan would be helpful, and working with someone to find that clarity would be a useful process? Is it that really loose and no plan is useful for you? And then getting to know the different parts of you, any firefighters or managers that are present in your relationship with food, and what would help them feel safe, and what would help bring you to the greatest place of peace in your relationship with food. And of course, this is a changing dynamic question, but to illustrate it, I have a slide, which I'm not going to go into in great detail now. I'm just going to show it briefly. But of course, it's in your PDF pack, so you can always download that and kind of reflect with it after this workshop and go into this question a little more. So now we're going to go inside. There's going to be an opportunity for us to reflect on this. So sense into your relationship with food on a day-to-day basis. Consider the rules or the no rules that govern that relationship. And acknowledge the parts that are connected to those rules or no rules. Acknowledge the parts that are in charge of your relationship with food, or take on certain responsibilities there. And feel the quality of holding for your parts. Do they feel burdened by this responsibility? Do they enjoy it? Do they feel stressed by it? Are their parts in conflict with one another? What support or guidance do they feel is available from within you? Do they feel there's anything that they can lean on, be guided by? Now connect with a food manager. Can you sense that part? Maybe in yourself, or it could be in someone that you know, someone whose relationship with food you feel is quite controlling, quite stressed. Or maybe they want to control your food. How do you feel towards this part that you've connected with in yourself or in someone else? And how do other parts feel towards them? You might get a sense of their values, what's important to them, what's dear to them. You can chat into the chat box if you wish, if anything comes up for you. Some of the values that I know I've heard from manager parts are order in the chaos, dignity, acceptance, feeling admired by others, feeling that others see us as coping well and that we have self-will, self-control, that we belong, that we're healthy. Let your manager part list their values, what matters to them. And also kind of on the flip side of that, any fears that they might have. Sort of opposites of the values. So being overpowered, isolation, social ridicule, being shamed or seen to be failing. Just let them list their fears, and you can chat into the chat box if you wish. And now the firefighter. Just invite that part to come into connection with you. What values does this part hold? What's important to these parts in us? Some of the values I've heard are independence, autonomy, not being overpowered or pushed around, pleasure and fun, and joy in food and eating. Food as like an emotional regulation tool, just to stay feeling okay. Food to celebrate, to commiserate, to connect with people, to enjoy life, to escape from work, drudgery, boredom, working too hard, giving too much of ourselves to others, not having anything left for us, chronically serving other people. So having something might be important for these parts, to have something that's just ours, that it can control, that it can give to us. And on the flip side, see if these parts want to list their fears, the opposites. Might be no pleasure in life, no spontaneity, boring life, stressful life or overwhelming. Being overpowered, overruled. Now that you've heard their values and fears, see if you can send some acknowledgement that you've heard them. and even maybe a little appreciation for the passion that they have in connection to these values that are so understandable, so worthwhile. You might even touch on a sense of the hurt and misunderstanding that's been caused through not really having their values heard, particularly by one another. Even send an apology that you sort of didn't see the importance of this for them, if that feels right to you to say. These ways that they've wanted to keep you safe via prioritizing their own unique and specific set of values that they care about. And once you've made connection with them in that way, we'll wrap up this meditation and come back together. Okay, I'm going to touch in on the subject of exiles. And the reason I'm going to do this is because it's good to respect our protectors in what they're up against, what the conflict hides, what they're struggling to keep hidden and keep us from feeling. And it's also important to recognize that without really going to that deeper place of the feelings beneath the behaviors with food and the conflict with food, it's very unlikely that we're going to find any sustainable freedom and relief from the conflict that might have raged within us around food and body weight. So we form our relationship with food from conception onwards. And it's really important to remember this, especially as therapists, because it may feel like we're talking to an adult who has these dysfunctional patterns with food and conflict going on. But actually, what's really helpful to remember is that one's relationship with food is formed from that really tender, vulnerable time. And this really helps to bring a lot of gentleness, a lot of space, a lot of patience and awareness of vulnerability into the field when we're working with the topic of food. So as soon as we were conceived, as soon as sperm met egg, that's when we started eating, and that's when we started releasing waste into our environment. So it's a really primal dance of give and receive, give and receive. And how our mother was when we were conceived and when we grew in her womb is really significant when we're exploring our deeper feelings around food. Was she well? Was she nourished herself? Did she feel safe? Did she feel protected? Did she feel valued? And how did we experience that relationship, that extremely intimate relationship with the universe, which at that time was our mother? Did we want more from her, more awareness, more relaxation? Did we want less from her? Did it feel overwhelming, the energy that she was bringing into this very vulnerable formative space for us? So food can be a metaphor for this, our most primal and essential relationship, and that is our relationship with the universe, with life itself, and some of our very deep beliefs about life. Is it safe? Are we nourished? Do we feel satisfied? Do we feel that there's enough for us? Is there enough available to support us? These things, these beliefs, these essential beliefs can go back a really, really long way. And some of that gets really mixed up in how we relate to food through our lives, including feelings of fear around food, fear that we're not going to have enough, we need to grab everything, or fear that we've taken too much, we don't want anything, we want to block out food. So whether it's one or the other, a lot of the times these patterns are formed extremely early on. So as we're exploring this topic of healing, we might do some gentle inquiries into what we know about our past, our experiences with food. And of course, some of this is hidden from us, and we can only really find it on an intuitive level, on a sensed level, through our bodies, through our intuition, and because some of our parts still hold those memories on some level. So what do we know about our experience of birth? And then as we were fed, we may have been breastfed, we may have been bottled fed. And how was that for us? What do we know about how our mothers or fathers, our caregivers, were back then? Were they well? Did they feel safe, nourished? How was it for them feeding us? Did they enjoy that? Or did they feel fear around that? Did they worry about us? Did they worry about our weight? Were we weighed? Were we measured when we were young? Was there tension around feeding? Were we fed on a schedule, or were we fed more intuitively? And then later, when we went from drinking milk to eating, were we weaned with a sense of exploration and wonder, so that we were allowed to help ourselves to whatever little tidbits we wanted and reject food if we wanted? Were we allowed to take it at our own pace and throw food around and make a big mess without getting in trouble? Or was it more regimented, more rigid? Were we sort of spoon-fed? And how was that for us if we were? And did we eat at certain times? Did we always get what we wanted when we were hungry? Or did we sometimes go without food? And on the flip side of that, were we sometimes fed when we weren't hungry and we felt powerless and couldn't do anything about that? So essentially, we're looking for kind of clues as to how well did our caregivers attune to our needs when it came to food. And if we didn't get our needs met back then, or we were fed when we really didn't need it, then what was it like for us? What kind of care might need to be given now retrospectively? What kind of healing might need to be done? And how can we access that information? How can we prioritize the time and space? How can we help our protectors feel safe enough for us to do that deep dive? And how can we assess when are we ready to really go to that really deep level of exploration around food, so that we can step out on a path of ending food conflict for ourselves and finding a fresh new way? Often when I'm talking to people about those formative years with food, and when some memories start to come in around food, what they remember is that food was often used for more than what it was. So it was used for bribery, or it was kind of used as a currency of love and affection or approval. It was withheld if love and affection were withheld. So you can see how food gets really, really tangled up in these essential needs that we have for being cared for, being accepted, loved, and a sense of belonging. And then we're often left wanting food when really there's a deeper want underneath. And some of the sort of the matrix of this, the blueprint of this, gets laid down very, very early. And so as we're going on this food freedom journey and freedom from conflict, the task is, and even though it can be a really tricky and sometimes painful one that requires a lot of tenderness and support, the task is to really find intuitively through our body and through our parts what happened back then, and what we can do now to bring our self-energy to the table to heal what felt not right back then in our relationship with food. So essentially, the act of eating is an extremely vulnerable act for not just humans, but all animals. Because when we're eating, we really are focused on the food, and then we can't focus on danger around us. We can't focus as much on, do we need to fight? Do we need to flee? Do we need to get away from danger? And if you've seen rabbits in a field, you can see that they'll eat cautiously, then they'll sort of stand up and they'll sort of prick their ears and they'll listen for sounds, then they'll go back to eating. So it's a tentative experience for those mammals of, am I safe? Can I really be with my food? And I think it's the same for us, especially when we're children. It's really important that we have environments when we're eating as children and now as adults where it's free of negative emotion, it's free of worry and stress or shock, loud noises. And if we've been in an environment growing up where there was tension in our family, there were rows or there were disagreements, and that happened during meal times, then that can really get kind of mixed up with our experience of eating, and it can sort of stay with us. And some of the exiling that happened back then gets sort of lodged in our digestive system. So in our jaw and our throat and in our stomach and in our gut, our bellies and in our anus, all of these really sensitive, muscular, I think the word peristalsis is coming to my mind. I think I remember that from biology, but some really tender and vulnerable synchronicity is at play when we're in the process of digesting effectively. And that can really easily get knocked or jolted when we have a difficult time back then when we're eating. And it could be in our families, or it could be in our educational settings if that felt unsafe to us in some ways, or if we were getting teased by other children or bullied, or if we didn't like the teachers that were around back then, or if we were being rushed with our food, or any of the many things that can kind of go wrong when we're eating can really, really stay with us into our adult years, such that eating becomes almost an association with those painful times. As adults, it's really tempting to kind of block out the experience of eating. Our protectors don't really want us to be in a sort of mindful eating experience. They don't want us to be silent with our food or really with our food. They'd rather that we perhaps eat in front of the TV or have the radio on when we're eating or read a book. And they'll often have us kind of nervously snacking because it feels safer than to really kind of be present with food, which brings up these painful memories that our body still has and holds. So I've included a slide here on what I call the eating guidelines. These are really, really precious to my heart because they were shared with me when I was just first coming into recovery. And they became, painful as they were to practice, they became the foundations for my healing around food. And I try to still practice them imperfectly, I might add, to this very day. And they're really important to me because I believe they act as kind of portals to where our wounds around eating lie, where our young ones are. And of course, because that's the case, it's always really important to check out with our protectors the extent to which they're willing to practice that, sort of have a negotiation with them. Which of the eating guidelines feels safe? Which doesn't feel so safe? Can we focus on just one if all of them feel too unmanageable? Or can we have a go at them all? What feels okay to our protectors, and when's a good time to have a go? It can be triggering for people that I work with when I introduce these guidelines because they feel like, oh my God, another set of rules around food. The last thing I need is more rules to follow. And they sort of set me up as an authority figure that's going to tell them off or not approve of them if they don't follow those guidelines. But it's actually not that at all. It's much more an invitation to see if we can go to those deeper places. And because that's the case, it's about a feeling of readiness. Is it okay for me to slow down with my food? Does it feel okay for me to be with my breath while I eat? Is it okay for me to notice how much fear and tension I hold? How much my belly might be gripping and holding and not wanting to really experience just the silence of me eating alone? Does that bring up loneliness or fear? And just being with all of those feelings when we feel ready to contain them, when we feel there's enough self energy and support from within to really go to those places. That last one about acupressure points is a little bit mysterious, so I'll just kind of decode that one a bit. So conflict around food did happen often, probably when we were young, but also it can happen now in our adulthood. And when there's conflict in our environment, when we've had a few crosswords with someone that we're about to eat with, or when we just generally feel stress and tension in our lives and we're about to sit down for a meal, it can be really important to just sort of take a pause and create a transition between that experience of conflict inside or outside ourselves and the act of eating. It can really help to reassure our parts, reassure our bodies. So it's good to take a few moments. Sometimes I like to use acupressure points. So I like to press my nails, lots of nerve endings there. Just gently bringing myself back to my body. If you're familiar with EFT, emotional freedom technique, you know that there are some quite potent points around our eyes, the bones of our nose and jaw. If I'm with someone, I might just do this subtly, just pressing. Personally, I prefer pressing to tapping. I find it a little bit less agitated and subtle. The bones here around my collarbone, just sort of helping bring myself down a few gears to a calmer place before I eat, creating a transition where I'm reassured and I'm in my body. Not a fix-all. Of course, I might still bring some of those emotions to the eating, and it's not about being perfect, but just acknowledging that eating is a tender act. And if I can bring a bit more calmness to that space, then that's helpful. So I'd love to hear your reaction, your responses, and any of your parts' responses to those eating guidelines. So feel free to just have a read through and kind of just put out there, maybe chat into the chat box or maybe just journal. What does that bring up for you? What do those invitations spark in you? Maybe some resistance or maybe some feelings of interest and curiosity about having a go with them. Maybe, of course, you're already practicing them, they're already important to you. You found them through your own path. Just let me know, I'd love to hear. Okay, so let's dive into that final conflict, and that's the conflict around body weight that rages within the field of eating disorders recovery. So there are people and parts that strongly believe it's healthier to be within a certain weight range, and then it's a really worthy goal to move towards that, as well as encouraging others to do just like that, to do likewise. And this group tend to be really polarized with those who believe that this attitude further inflames our cultural kind of prejudices and ostracizes those that might be living in larger bodies, for example. So they also might believe, that other camp, that second camp, that any kind of goal is sort of in its essence never in today. It's always somehow in the future. And that really inflames the parts of us that feel dissatisfied or don't accept the way that we are today. So let's go into this a little bit. What do I believe? Well, I believe that it's not just like with the food conflict, it's not either or. There doesn't need to be two camps. One, yes, a weight gain trajectory is good, and the other one, no, there should never be a weight gain trajectory. For me, it's always about including all parts of the person that are really, really feeling strongly about this topic in the conversation, and having them look towards the person's self for guidance as to what's the right way forward, where every part feels welcomed and heard and willing and safe with recovery. So weight and shape presents a problem if at least one part of a person feels strongly that it's a problem. And that can often really bring a person, in fact, to recovery. It can be a part that extremely feels extremely connected to the motivation of wanting to lose weight or gain weight, for example. But usually my experience is that it's often people that want to lose weight that feel really motivated to get into recovery. My experience is that people that need to gain weight often find their way into recovery either because people around them are very worried about them or because they're finding themselves really miserable in other areas. But there are parts that really are attached to being underweight. So anyway, the important thing is to find the parts that harbour a motivation around, let's say, weight loss. And it's important to get to know these parts and have them really front and centre in recovery, because they otherwise could well bring an energy of needing to fix the person and needing to have recovery happen very quickly because they feel desperate to lose weight. They might try and push the parts that are responsible for the food conflict. So they might try and push the firefighter to change, or they might try and fix that firefighter, for example, or they might try and change the manager to bring more calm to the system. But actually, it's not a calmness at all. They just want quick change so that the person's body can transform the way that they vision that they want it to, they want that person to. So even if the person is in health difficulties due to weight or due to nutrition, their system can be very, very sensitive to this internal part of them with its strong agenda. And it can be very sensitive if the therapist also has a part that has that strong agenda and wants to try and push them to change. And the part or parts of them not wanting to change weight will become really polarized with that part or parts of them that does want to change weight, and the therapist part of them, perhaps, if that therapist has a part that also wants them to change weight, it can get quite conflicted. So it's really important that the therapist themselves feels really relaxed and doesn't have an agenda that they're pushing. And if the therapist is really worried about the person, either because they feel they're really underweight or they're really worried because they're very overweight and maybe struggling with lots of health conditions that are associated with that, then for the therapist's sake and for the sake of the therapy, they need to find a way that they can work also with any other healthcare professionals in the person's support system. So it could be that the person regularly sees a doctor to be weighed or to receive advice and some kind of monitoring, and that the therapist can have a release to speak to that doctor if they want to feel that they're not alone with the responsibility of kind of having the person recover, which can be a really heavy burden and can kind of place unnecessary pressure on the therapy that can just stymie the therapy process. So it's really important that the therapist checks in with what they need to feel safe when it comes to weight, and that they're not alone with the responsibility, a responsibility that's in fact outside of our area of expertise, not being doctors or healthcare professionals in that way. So a weight change trajectory as a motivation for recovery is possible, I believe, but only if all parts are on board with this. And in my experience, long-standing weight issues, whether really high weight or really low weight, is always an indicator of a person's, I'm going to use the word porosity in relationship with others. So how much a person has kind of let in or not let in, and the pain that this has caused. So often this includes weight being used as a tool to shield sexual attention that has felt unsafe, whether it was from adults when the person was a child, whether it's in teenage years or 20s, but usually when the person's quite young, they will have experienced the transgression of their boundaries, and they won't have been able to find a way to say no or to set those limits. And other ways in which the person hasn't been able to set limits or say no, so giving to people, helping people, serving people, going way above and beyond what actually feels okay for them at a deeper level. And in all these cases, weight can be used as a tool for a person's yes or no. So it can be a way of blocking out unwanted energy from others, whether it's the blocking out of not taking in food as a metaphor for not wanting to take in energy, or the blocking out of unwanted attention by weight gain through a kind of buffering, a sort of physical cushioning of that person with the world. Like, I'm not going to receive your energy. It's a kind of no. And that no stands in for the actual no that the person never got to say. And of course, underneath there are exiles, there are hurt parts. And it's important, if those weight protectors agree, both the ones that want the weight loss and the ones that don't, if they agree to go there, it's an important part of the process to listen to the parts that hold that hurt, listen to their stories, and help them to consider the idea that they might be able to reclaim their voice, whether that's going back to those moments where their limits were transgressed, there was lack of consent, lack of control, or whether it means learning how to say yes and no in their relationships in the present. The capacity to be able to discern and express an authentic and self-led yes and no, in my experience, so often comes in to helping someone get beyond the conflicts around food and body weight. And this can be a gradual and delicate process of working with the past and working with the present, working with the relationships the person has in their present, and often with relationships in work as well as with family. This is delicate work, and there is no place for fear-based agendas within this process. Pushing, just like I said before, clogs up the process, makes it congested, and it doesn't work. So on the flip side of the coin, as well as parts that don't want to lose weight, that feel that weight loss will lead to going back to those painful memories or feeling out of control in the relationships they have in their life today, and being overwhelmed by other people's needs and going into serving others and not being able to say no. On the other side of that, there may be parts that, like I said before, are very, very invested in wanting to change that person's weight. And they equally need to be heard, they need to be honoured, they need to be included. And their values, their hopes, their dreams need to be treated as very precious, very valuable, and understood. And often these things include the value of an increased energy level for the person, or increased health, or longevity of life, or change. The person's life starts to transform, they have intimacy with others, they feel sexually desirable, or they feel that people believe them to be beautiful or attractive, and they themselves feel beautiful and attractive. And there may be visions and dreams for their life that are kind of buried under their obsession and their difficulties with weight, such as finding the one, that partner that they are going to stay with, or starting a family, or having a different career or a creative vision. And these things will have often been blocked by their preoccupation and their conflict with food and body. So there's a kind of excavation of dreams that can happen when working with weight. And a big part of that is often, as with other journeys inside and inwards and downwards, is meeting hurt parts. So parts that really wanted to be a different weight back then in school or in teenage years, and they hold hurts about not feeling desirable or not feeling they belonged, or maybe there was bullying because of the person's appearance. And it's really important that those younger ones get an opportunity to express how important it is that they look good and that they fit in, and how painful it was if they didn't feel like that back then. All of that needs to be affirmed, understood, and any burdens that got picked up back then need to be released with support. So I believe that weight trajectories need not be feared, they need not be avoided, but the important thing for finding harmony in this area is that, as with any goal or aim, it needs to be a unanimous vision across the board. Even if some parts feel a bit more hesitant or doubtful, there needs to be enough safety within the system for there to be an idea of where the person would like to be headed, and steps being taken in that direction. So my experience is that through honestly exploring this topic, all of that can be discovered. There isn't actually much more to it than the usual process of IFS, finding the parts, hearing from them, not being afraid of the ones that have got strong agendas or that might be blended with the person, really recognizing them, having the courage as therapists to say, I see you, and naming it as a part. Let's bring it out, let's hear from it. It's here, let's include it. And that's a really valuable process a much more valuable process than coming right in with an attempt to have a tracked and monitored achievement, or avoiding the topic altogether and not wanting to go there, not wanting to explore it, and thinking it's not a good part, it's not a good thing to focus on, like weight, oh no, that's kind of superficial, we shouldn't look at that, when actually it might be a burning desire within a person that really needs to be explored. Okay, I'm going to invite you to join me for another meditation. And this is an opportunity to explore how we show up with someone who might be struggling with their food, with their body weight. Explore how we can best hold space for someone who's having that experience of conflict. So I invite you to picture yourself with someone, a client, a friend, family member, maybe your child. And this someone is struggling around food. They're blended with parts. Perhaps they're behaving in worrying ways. Perhaps they're noticeably distressed. Perhaps their health is compromised, maybe even in a dangerous way. They may be asking for your help, or they may be completely avoiding any input from you. Just notice what it feels like being with them. Do you feel any curiosity? And if you do feel curiosity, notice where it comes from. Does it come from your mind, from thinking, objectifying parts, keeping you distanced, keeping you as an expert safe from their suffering, from being overwhelmed by feelings? Or does it come from your heart, from an openness? Notice your body when you're talking with this person about food and weight. Do you have parts that are working really hard, working harder than them, trying to help them, trying to fix them? Do you have parts feeling frightened, tense, angry, holding strong opinions, feeling stressed or burdened with responsibility? The only one that can help? Do you have a part that holds a strong opinion as to the right way forward for this person, what they should be eating or how they should eat or what path they should take? And if you do have a part that has an opinion like that, notice how that part relates to its opinion. Does it come across fiery? Does it have urgency to communicate its message, to get through to the person? Maybe to break through their protectors? And now invite your parts to turn around away from the person and to look into your eyes, into the eyes of self. Invite any parts that have been activated by being with the person to express how they are, how they're feeling, any deeper concerns they're holding, any deeper vulnerability. You may sense the presence of scared young parts. There may even be parts of you who experienced or witnessed distress around this topic growing up, or who themselves know the pain of being overfull or or really hungry. You might notice parts of you that are deeply connected to the knowledge of your vulnerable and tender and fragile human body, who fear starvation or being weighted down, or fear for your digestive system, your heart, and that fear has been activated through seeing someone struggling, their health impacted. So just take a moment and notice what parts of you are there, what parts of you need your support. And offer reassurance within yourself that your own protectors can relax from those burdened roles that they might have of trying to help someone. All your parts can now be reconnected to yourself. And that self inside yourself, that self outside yourself, both of those can be called upon as the guiding principle within this relationship with this person, to offer inspiration and intuition as to how to be with this person, how to support them, how to serve them, whatever your role might be in their life, what qualities to bring. Now I invite you to turn back round to face this person again, if your parts feel safe to do so. And just notice the difference in quality, if any, in how you are with them now. Notice, was there a difference in how you approached that person's suffering before and after you went inside? Just jot down any reflections in your journal or into the chat box. So thank you so much for joining me for part 1. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't time for part 2 and part 3 in this 2-hour section. But if you follow this link, you can join me over there and we'll wrap up this workshop there together. This link will expire 30 days after the date of the live workshop. Thank you so much for joining me today in this presentation and workshop, Beyond Food and Body Weight Polarities, with me, Naomi Nygaard. I wish you a really wonderful rest of the conference and a happy and peaceful rest of your day. Thank you, much love, goodbye.